Over 80 episodes later, and we're into season 9. With my guests, we'll be diving into all things leadership, teamwork, engagement, mental well-being, and high performance. We have the conversations that really matter, that put the human factor back into business, because we know that when we get people right, we get business right. If you want to find out more about how to develop an experience that brings out the best in people, get in touch. I'm your host, Lisa, psychologist and psychotherapist and founder of It's Time for Change. Thank you for joining me on Beyond the Water Cooler. We are back and we are kicking off a new series with an international twist as my guest is joining me from Canada. Welcome to the show, Gregg Brown.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here from the old colonies, as we used to say many years ago.
So tell me, or tell our listeners, a bit about exactly where you are and what the weather's doing, because I've just been having a bit of a rant about the weather here.
Well, we've just had a very, very stormy week. I'm on the north shore of Lake Erie, just outside of Toronto, Canada, and it is stormy and thundering.
I'm hoping that when this goes live, because we are actually recording in July.
Yeah.
When this goes live, it'll be September. And I'm hoping at that point we're going to have our summer. So when people are listening, they'll be like, what? What's all that rain about?
I agree.
We need it. So you are, I'm going to read this, a change and future of work strategist, speaker, author, founder, which is a pretty impressive job title.
Oh, yeah,
Tell us more. Yeah. Well, if you made it up, this is going to put you on the spot. Tell us more about what that's about.
Well, so a few things. So I have my own business and I run my own business, which works with the organization to build their change capabilities. So, the pace of change has picked up, of course, and since COVID and even before that. And I just seem to be lucky to be in a space that I like to be in, that people always need change. So I work with organizations on that, which tends to be predominantly speaking workshops now. In my past life, I used to, lead large scale change initiatives, both in public and private sector. But now it's mostly speaking, workshops, and having fun.
That sounds good. I think it's really important, that bit, isn't it, about talking about what's kind of relevant, just like a bit being human, like that whole aspect of change. So I've literally just come off being a presenter on a webinar about being human in leadership. And I think there's a real move towards people talking about the stuff that is actually about who we really are and how we really show up. And yeah, just kind of, and what feels really relevant right now, hugely important.
Well, yeah, and I mean, you hit a really good point, which is, even though I would say I use the general broad term change management to talk about what I do, I don't, teach people how to do change management plans and all that stuff anymore. I can teach anyone to do a change management plan, a strategic plan, a project plan. I've done many of them. I'm good at it. It's a lot harder to lead your team from A to B. It's a lot harder to lead your team during lots of change, small or large. And it's really hard to lead a team when you don't have direct authority over them, which most people don't these days.
And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we got introduced via Duncan Target, wasn't it?
We did.
And so he was also a guest recently on my podcast. And he was telling me that you talk about a load of stuff that he knows that I'm super passionate about. And then when we connected last week, it was like this bubble of energy just came up as we're like talking about what the future of work really looks like and what leadership is really about, and all this stuff, challenging the status quo, all this stuff that actually is about how we experience work and how we show up at work. So I thought today I'm going to put some statements. I don't normally do podcasts like this. Normally it's a bit of just a chat. But when you and I were talking last week, we kind of came up with, there were some kind of key themes. And so we've got some statements, and I'm going to put the statement out there and we're going to just discuss it and see what happens. So first, we're going to kick off with this. Everyone wants to know what the future of work is.
Oh my gosh, does everyone want to know? I wrote a paper on it last year, and it includes some of the key trends and so on. And it was really funny because I was presenting at a conference down in Florida. I think it was in February, and it was 100th anniversary of an organization. And what was quite interesting, and it came to me just on the spot, that the three main drivers of the future of work today are the same drivers that they were 100 years ago. They just look different. So,
Mhm.
shifting, societal landscape, changing economic conditions, and of course, rapid advancements in technology. It looks different today, but those are the main drivers that were there years ago. So I really figured, let's stop worrying about what the future work is. It's important to know the trends, but we know that the change is happening so rapidly. What's AI today is going to be different than AI tomorrow. So instead of focusing on the future of work, let's focus on making ourselves, our teams, our leaders, our organizations more future ready. So with
Mhm.
future ready capabilities so that they can handle whatever comes up.
Yeah. That future ready is a term I use a huge amount
Mm,
with a colleague of mine, Jem. We run something called Leadership Labs. And it's all about, we talk about being future ready. So when
mm,
you're trying to think about how to develop people, are you trying to develop them in terms of what we've always had in this company, or are you trying to think about what we need next and what the skills are and the confidence levels are and so on and the knowledge to get to where we want to go? And that's a slightly different take on we just need more of the same, the same, the same. But it's about the people you've
absolutely.
got. Where is it you want to get to, and how are we getting there?
Well, and I love that you're using that because I started about a year ago, maybe two, because I talk a lot. I mean, my web domain's bechangeready.com. So I'm all about let's be change ready, be able to step into change, be able to respond to change, build our change muscles, all that stuff, which is good. Uh, but future readiness to me is very much along the lines of what you're saying, which is it's not just about handling all that stuff. Yes, it is. It's also about being strategic. It's about initiating change. It's about creating. It's about activating. It's about preparing. And I love that you're doing that take because it's very. I think in today's world, um, we require that.
I like that term, active leading, because it's like,
Mm,
again, we have so many people who are in leadership roles who end up with this title. It's like, I'm supposed to be a leader, but they're
mm.
not, there's nothing intentional about how they lead, or they focus on the tangible stuff like how are we allocating work and how are we
Yeah,
doing,
or
and it's like,
budgets.
yeah, or budgets. And it's like, there's nothing in there about the emotional side, the actual how do we motivate people and how do we engage people? And because people don't know how to do it, and no one seems to kind of create the space or time to think about what that actually means. What does leadership mean to me? How do I want to show up? What are my experience to me? What do people around me need of me? Those are the conversations we don't seem to be having.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a few reasons we're not having them. Everyone's under pressure to get things done to complete with less time, less money, uh, and I think as a result of that, these go hand in hand. We have to ramp up our people engagement skills when that is happening. Because, sometimes as leaders, I like to think of, we're the silent bulldozer at the back guiding people along. Sometimes we're at the front with that clear vision, dragging people down that path. And other times, and we saw this during COVID, we're leading alongside our teams and we're in the muck with them. And I feel that it's not just during COVID, but now that we're in the muck together. And it is about, it takes a lot of strength to show vulnerability. And I think for leaders to take the pressure off themselves to be more human,
Mm.
not feeling like they have to have all the answers, that they can say, I'm in this with you. I don't know what the heck we're doing. We're going to figure it out. Goes
Exactly.
way more with a team.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that being in the muck together, when we are feeling that pressure and the stress, that impacts on our ability to problem solve and to have empathy and to have, good relationships and to communicate well and all the stuff that is needed of us as a leader. We are still human, and so actually our ability to do what's needed of us
Hmm.
is really impacted when we are feeling under stress, under pressure. And but yet that challenge isn't addressed, or it's not even voiced in terms of I'm also feeling, because there's that sense in there that I've got to have a mask on and I've got to be everything to
Absolutely.
everyone, and I'm not allowed to be vulnerable or overwhelmed or feeling burnt out or anything, because I'm a leader and I have to keep it all together. It's like, actually, that's the clever stuff goes straight out the window when you're feeling stressed.
Yeah, and I wrote a paper on disruptive empathy earlier this year that's coming out in the fall. It's going to as an article first, and then I'll put it out as a paper. Um, and it's really gets to the heart of what you're saying, which is about empathetic leadership, and I call it disruptive empathy because disruptive empathy is deeper because it's not just about, oh, let's hold hands, let's sing, let's cry. Ugh, I don't want to do that at work. This is about, actively seeking out discomfort, challenging the notion of hierarchy and including, everyone's experience in the conversation. It's about prioritizing vulnerability over invulnerability. And it takes a lot more strength, like I said, and it takes a lot more security to show vulnerability. And when we do that, it builds trust. And when we build trust, that's when people will engage with us really easily. And, we've seen that, prioritizing short term gains doesn't work.
Mm.
You know, people, you know, quiet quitting, I don't know if quiet quitting's still going on that much, and the great resignation and all those, buzzwords that came out. Those have always gone on, just maybe
Mm.
not in the same period of time. But I think disruptive empathy is really taking a conscious approach. This is going to be a leadership skill that I'm going to develop as a starting point to lead people down the path of change.
I like that. And actually, that word disruptive
Mm.
lends itself nicely to my next statement, which I'm going to throw out there. So, disruption is necessary for work to evolve.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Well, innovation is disruption, right? So when you think about it, and if you think about meetings that you've sat in or I've sat in, and our listeners have all of them sit in meetings, there's always someone in the meeting who is someone like me, and this used to be me. I'd be in a meeting, I've been in the organization a long time. Someone would bring up an idea, and I'd be like, "That's not going to work here. I've been here 11 years. What do you think?" You know. So
Mm.
shutting down ideas. So when we have when we encounter disruption, our general um, piece, even people that love change, like, oh my gosh, I love change. I'm like, well, you don't like change that has a negative impact on you. I don't care how Pollyanna you are. If you get fired from your job, it's a completely different experience than if you choose to leave. So don't tell me you like lots of change. We all love change we agree with, or
Yeah.
that's good for us, or that enhances us. But change that's good for the client, that's going to create extra work for me, I really don't want to do it. And I really don't want to listen to your idea because you've never worked here before and you're new. And I think that it's that's disruption at a very granular level. But that's where we often shut down innovation, and that's where we shut down new ideas. And we need to have disruption to move forward.
It's interesting that kind of being done to us or us being part of it, because I remember doing an exercise with a client I was working with, their leadership team,
Mm-hmm.
around the relationship with politics. As
Yeah,
in terms of the political, it's a very large organization, it's very political, and the politics are exhausting. And we were talking about how to have empathy for, as a leader, if
mm.
you are instigating the change, you feel good about it, but you're leading people who might not,
Oh,
because it's being done to them. Just the same as actually when you're told by the government, this is what you've got to do, you don't like it because it's not your decision. And I think just the awareness of it at that level is so key, and to acknowledge that.
absolutely. And I think that, work, the workplace is not a democracy. We forget that. It is usually a top down hierarchical organization, and all workplaces are, whether they're public sector or private. And yes, it's top down funneling up, and hopefully it's inclusive, and blah blah blah, all that other
Mm.
stuff. But ultimately, it's hierarchical. And the thing with that comes out of what you're saying is that most change at work we consider disruptive because it's regulatory, legislative, comes from above. It might even come from our team, but it still creates extra work and extra time, and no one has any extra work or time. So the layers of disruption can be different. And I think that we look at how to build the skills to handle those differently. Dr. Linda Hoops did some really good research on this. She's a psychologist in the US around resilience and, building up those change muscles to handle disruptive change well. And, you know, while it's intuitive for most of us, it's always nice to know there's research that backs this up.
Mm. I also think that word disruption, for a lot of people, they will associate that with like conflict. So that
Yeah.
whole kind of, if we're being disruptive and that means we're no longer aligned because stuff's changing, it's like actually that means we're disagreeing with each other or disagreeing with how things are. And people tend to avoid conflict at all costs.
Oh,
It's like actually I just feel really uncomfortable with it. And even when you say no, no, actually we're inviting ideas, we want to hear people's perspectives and we want to acknowledge that this is really tough, and just that sense of standing in a different space and just saying, actually, I'm not sure I agree with that, or I'm not sure I
mhm.
like the impact of that, or
Yeah.
people don't feel comfortable with that, do they?
Well, they don't, but I think as leaders, it's our job to create the space,
Absolutely.
because again, change that happens from above, I remember one organization I worked at, the senior folks had decided to move offices, and it was going to move from north of the city that I lived in at the time to downtown center, and it was going to increase some of my staff's commute by 2.5 hours.
Ooh.
Not my decision. It was going to increase parking, like compared to downtown to outside of downtown. No one was happy. And, and you always have a choice. This is what we're doing as an organization. You always have a choice. Like that's my philosophy with things. I knew it was going to create a lot of disruption, and I didn't want it to impact people's performance too much. So I started this every staff meeting I had for a month with a 10-minute complaint session that I reframed into a community of understanding. We
Mm.
are just going to get 10. I didn't call it that, but I did after a while. I'm like, this is a really community of understanding, not a community of practice. And I just said, look, a lot of you hate this idea. A lot of you like this idea. I hate it. For me, I see why we're doing it, and we need to figure it out. So let's just start. We're only going to spend 10 minutes. Let's get the crap on the table. If there's something I can do about it, I will. If there's not, let's just get it out. Because
Mm.
the thing is, and I tell you, it really, really helped. And yes, I did lose some people, but it kept us. It kept the outside water cooler conversations minimal, even though they still happened. It was not completely disruptive in the workplace because they knew what they could come to me and we could complain, and I wasn't going to try to solve it. And I think during change and disruption, it's really important to remember that listening and acknowledging people's concerns moves them down the path of change as much as problem solving.
It absolutely does, because I think it's so easy for people to plan a process of change, people who are in control of it, and it's all kind of a very logical sequence. It's almost like this process we're just going to take everyone through without thinking about the emotional impact. And when we give people a platform, a space, I love that community of understanding. When you give people that space to say, how do you really feel? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how's this really landing for you? And trying to understand people's fears, because if you take every communication
Yeah.
or every behavior is communicating something. So
Yeah.
when someone is resisting, they're being a pain in the backside because
Mhm.
they're not agreeing with you, or they're not showing up in the way you want them to show up. Why is that? Like, what is that really about? It's not because they got out of bed this morning and decided to be really awkward today. It's
Yeah.
because they're maybe scared of something, or what does it mean for them? What's their part in it?
Yeah.
How's it going to impact their performance? Are you going to criticize them because you're asking them to do something new? And it takes a whole load of extra energy to do something new, and therefore they're not going to be quite as amazing for the few weeks or months it takes to nail that. So I think having that space
Yeah.
to be able to talk openly and to try and understand why people are feeling and how they're showing up
Yeah. Yeah.
is so important.
Well, I think, and so I love the language we're using around fears and how we show up. In
Mm,
the business world, what I use is I'm like, let's talk about the impacts.
mm,
So I use very hard business language so that they know it's not going to be a let's hold hands and sing. It's
mm.
like, let's get our complaints, let's talk about the impacts, and then we'll see if there's something I can do about it. I will. If not, let's just get them on the table. Because you know that when we get our stuff on the table, when you know other people are in the same boat as you, it helps you manage it.
And it takes the
And
focus off you having, as the leader, having to resolve everything, because as
and
soon
you
as you've
don't
got
want
something
to
out
have to
there,
do that.
actually you've got other people going, well, this is how I've thought about it, or this is what I'm doing about it.
Absolutely.
And yeah, and I guess it also just increases that sense of empathy from everyone. So if you're just having a stroppy day, they understand why you're stropping around, which is
Well, I wanted to go back to something you said too, which is aligning with some research I read recently. I think it was from McKinsey or Gartner or somebody. Um, when you're talking about politics in the workplace, uh, the number one skill of leaders that's saying that leaders are needing within the next 5 years, and I'd say probably in next year, is conflict management, prevention, and resolution skills. And they said the reason is because 50% of the planet is going through elections this year that are increasingly polarizing people. And though while we say we don't talk about politics at work, it does filter out. So I'm not saying you should have a staff meeting and say, who do you vote for? That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is we have to be prepared that even though we try to keep these conversations out of the workplace, they sometimes come in. And we need to be prepared as leaders, which is what you're working with people on, to manage, whether it's internal politics or, politics in terms of what's going on in a democratic environment
yeah, yeah,
outside. So you're right
yeah,
on with that.
interesting.
Yeah.
Should we take another statement?
Yeah. Statement
Okay.
time.
Next one. Taking action requires the right mindset.
Mm, for sure. You have to have, and we know this in psychology, but I'll sort of bring it to the workplace. To start to take action on an idea, you have to get your mindset together. And mindset is not a woo-woo term. It's a collection of neurons in the prefrontal cortex, where the executive functioning of your brain resides. So it is a part of your brain that you need to get going. And anybody that's moved from an individual contributor role to a leadership role knows your mindset has to shift because that drives your actions. The job title doesn't. Your function does not. It's your mindset.
And do you think a lot of leaders struggle with that because they don't realize it requires a change of mindset? They don't know
Yeah.
how to do that.
I think leaders do a few things. I include myself in this. When I led a large group of people, we as leaders think we have to have all the answers. It just comes with the job title. We think we have to have all the answers. And I'm like, take the pressure off. You don't. You don't.
Mm,
And it goes back to what we were talking about earlier about being vulnerable. I don't know. I don't know what the heck's going to happen. Let's work it out together.
mm.
That builds the humanity and authenticity for people to take action. So I think there's some mindset shifts, which are stuff like you don't need to have all the answers. So take the pressure off. Stop trying to sell and convince everyone that you're to get on board your ideas. Get into the head of the other person. Figure out what do they need to be, do, know, or have to say yes. Because we put this pressure. We have to sell and convince others. We got to make this happen. We have to have all the answers. We have to make people do things. I'm like, whoa, people have a choice. Let's just get the real basic stuff here. Everyone has a choice.
And
They
you
have
know
a,
what? And then more likely to make the choice you want them to make if they
yeah,
understand it and if they've had a chance to ask their questions and share their worries and just and engage in the how we do it. So rather, like you say, rather than telling people this is what you need to be doing because it's amazing, is
yeah,
like actually what does it look like and how are we getting there? So it comes back to your point, a leader is not determining everything, but a leader is creating the right space for people to be able to articulate and problem solve and collaborate and do everything else in terms of working out how they work collectively, which I think is that's the really good thing about leadership, along with all the vulnerability and everything else that you've outlined.
yeah. And I think, it still sometimes comes down to this is what we're doing. And, people do have a choice,
Mm,
you have a choice to show up at work on time. There's consequences if you don't,
exactly.
so when we get to that place of peace with that stuff,
Mm,
and sometimes people say, I do a lot of work in unionized environments, and people say, well, there's really no consequences. I'm like, well, there are. If you don't get this report to me, Lisa might be late on her deliverables. Do you want Lisa to be late? you
mm.
know that's my inner leadership voice. Do you want Lisa to be late? In my inner leadership face, we have our inner leadership
Yeah,
voices
yeah,
and
yeah,
faces and our outer leadership
yeah.
voices.
But I think it also
um
takes a degree of confidence, doesn't it, to be able to say, as a leader, that actually there are consequences, or this is just how we do stuff here. Because again, I think
yeah,
there's been such a move towards keeping everyone happy and trying to make sure everyone's having a great experience. And I'm bending over backwards to kind of support everyone. That, I've had to have conversations with various leaders about actually you're doing too much. This person is not fulfilling their role.
yeah,
You're turning yourself inside out, trying to almost do your role as the leader or the MD or whoever, and you're trying to support this person to the extent where it's having a negative impact on you as a leader
for sure.
and the organization. But this person still isn't fulfilling their role, and it's a hard step for some people to make in terms of actually it's just not working.
I was working with an organization many years ago, and they terminated the head person, the CEO, and for good reasons.
Hmm.
And what was really funny, which I really respected, was they brought in an interim CEO who'd known the company for their years, had been on their board, so knew the inner workings of it, was in his, I want to say, mid 60s, retired from sort of full-time work, but knew how to run a multi-gazillion-dollar organization, and a very good people person as well. And one of those balance that I'm just like, you're a great leader. I sort of was a little in awe of him.
Mm.
And what was, I remember being at a town hall right after they'd gotten rid of the CEO, and so why did we get rid of so and so? And I just loved his answer. He said, you know what? That's something you'll never know. He
Mm.
said, they're gone. It's a private conversation. You're never going to know the answer to it. And we need to move on. And I just thought, wow. And he did it in a really nice way. Like, he didn't shut the person down and make them feel silly. It was just like, he said, look, a lot of you have these questions about
Mm.
this termination. It's something you're never going to know. It's
That's
private,
brilliant.
it's confidential. And I just thought, that was such a good model, because I always feel I have to explain myself and I don't,
Mm.
you know, and and that was respectful for people, because he said, I remember it like it was yesterday. He said, if I terminated you, would you want me to tell 1,000 people the reason you are not here?
Yeah.
And he did it beautifully, and people were like in awe, and he built trust and respect. He didn't just shut that person down. So
That's a
it was
great
just, it
example.
was awe-inspiring to see.
So on mindset as well,
Hmm.
positive thinking.
Oh, I hate positive thinking.
No, you know what? This is why I love this, and this is why I love this conversation with you last week, because all this stuff that people you hear it talked about all the time, we should
Uh,
be talking about this and we should be doing that, and it's like,
uh,
oh,
yeah. Um, so when I say positive, I hate positive thinking. Let me put a parameter around that. If and I'm going to use the term, most people, if not everyone, has said, I need to go to my team and put a positive spin on this. I'm like, oh, don't. They'll just think you're insincere and out of touch with reality. So most people, and I've included myself, and this is something I've unlearned, and I'm good at it now, but I used to be this way. And I still sometimes get into it where I'll say something positive that's not the right time.
mm,
So like if you've had a really bad day at work, and many of our listeners I'm sure have had bad days at work, not where they work now, but other jobs,
mhm.
just in case their bosses are listening. Um, you after work you phone someone at home or call go home. You're like, oh my gosh, I had a rotten day. Greg was going on about me with this, and Lisa did needed that research paper, and Duncan wanted this to happen, and my boss was on me about this, and oh my gosh, I just had the worst rotten day. And my mom would have put a positive spin on that and said, hey, you should be really grateful that you have a job.
Yeah.
Or someone will say, well, did you go talk to HR about it?
Mm,
Like that's putting a positive spin. No, no, no. What you really want is, hey, it sucks. It sounds like you had a bad day.
exactly.
Moves people down the path of change. So, you know, the tyranny people use positive thinking. I do believe you want to think positively and anticipate positive outcomes because research shows high performers anticipate positive social interactions, they anticipate positive outcomes. It doesn't mean they put a positive spin.
Mm,
By anticipating positive outcomes or positive social interactions, what it means is you're getting your mindset engaged to start to perform
yeah.
in a way that is going to go well. And it means you're going to be more in a place to handle the crap that comes up.
And it's having those honest conversations again, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
in terms of thinking about the positive, it's like, well, actually, it's asking questions like, what does the ideal future look like? What does success look like? When we are all working our socks off to achieve X, what does X actually look like? What does it feel like?
Yeah,
And actually having
absolutely.
that really positive image of what we're trying to work towards, so that almost it looks so enticing. I'm motivated internally to go there rather than someone trying to push me and, like you said earlier, trying to sell it. It's like actually we can, but it's a genuine positive future rather than
Yeah.
just positive spin.
And you know what? It might not be a positive future for me.
Mm,
And, you know, I think it's good to do that. And I think it's also, if depending on the timing, to say, this really sucks now. I know it's hard. We're all working extra time. We are going to get out of this. And right now it's really hard. So
yeah.
just level set.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you have to get into the negative to get out of it.
Yeah.
And you can still take a positive approach
Mm,
in a negative situation. So let
yeah.
me give you an example of that that's not work related. Like, and hopefully this has never happened to anyone listening. Trigger warning. Uh,
Mm.
if you go home from work one day and you see your house burned down or your flat, wherever you live, and you're standing there going, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe my bloody house burned down," and a well-meaning neighbor comes up and says, "Hey, Lisa, it's not so bad. You're going to get a new kitchen. You always wanted a new kitchen. You've been complaining about your old kitchen for the last 10 years. You're going to get a new kitchen. Woo!" You're going to want to cuff them in the head, proverbially.
Mm-hmm.
Because what do you really want at that moment? Hey, this sucks. What can I do to help?
Mm.
What can I do to help is taking a positive approach. Calling the insurance companies, taking a positive approach once you get through the emotional turmoil. But if you're the leader or providing support in that case, it's what can I do to help?
Yeah. And I think hearing, in a work situation, actually hearing people's personal stories really helps in terms of understanding like why I'm here and why I'm feeling like this. So when
Yeah.
working with an organization recently, and everyone on the leadership board got to share their story about why they're actually in their role, and why they felt how they felt about what was going on in the company.
Hmm.
And the kind of aha moments in that room are like, oh, that's why you're so invested in this bit of what's going on with the change right now, or that's why you don't like that particular part of our business or the way we relate to each other, because I never knew that about you. And it's almost that sense of kind of honoring a whole person in terms of, you've got a past, you've got a, how you're feeling today is based on what's gone before, your experience in this company or other companies, and it shapes everything your brain's now expecting to happen next. And when we understand that in each other, it helps people acknowledge what's gone on in the past and be able to then move forward to wherever you're going next. And it might be a bumpy road, and what goes next might not feel incredibly positive at that moment, but everyone's got a sense of understanding of who the people are that they're going on that journey with.
You know, that's huge. You know, with Duncan's group, when I used to work over here in North America, I remember I did some leadership work with them, and we did some survey of some type like DISC or True Colors or one of
Mhm.
those. And I'm not a big believer in assessment tools because they tend to pigeonhole and stereotype. However, if they're done well and taught well, like I think I teach them, it's really about creating a sense of understanding so that I remember being facilitating this part of a workshop many years ago, and folks in one group were saying, this is how I like to work and what I need, and the folks in the other were like, this is what we need. And they're like, oh, that's why you need that. I thought you were just doing it to tick me off.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, we just don't care. So it was just this really, whenever you have an aha moment, which is what you're talking
Mm,
about, of you're not doing this to tick me off. You're
mm.
just doing it because it's you,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
or it's because that's how you do your work. And we work differently.
Mm.
And I love anytime we can create that understanding because it brings, if we could just do that on a global level, I'd be really happy.
Yeah.
Just to say, we have a lot more in common than not in common.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
when we
yeah.
find those commonalities, it can really build a bridge of understanding. Because most people, I believe, like, on the global level, want to play in the middle. Not everybody's, super left or super right. Most people want to play in the middle, and most people want to get along. We
Mm.
want to get along with our neighbors. We want to get along with our coworkers.
Mm.
And, you know, I think a great, microcosm of the world is the workplace,
Mm.
and to
We spent a
practice
huge
those
amount of
skills
time.
there.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, I'm going to move on to our next statement,
Yes.
because I'm looking forward to this one. Right. We need to get out of our comfort zone, or do we?
Um, so I love comfort zones, and I think comfort zones are really good, and I think they get a bad rap.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I like comfort zones is because you're at your most productive in your comfort zone. And by productivity, I mean you're losing the least amount of energy to do the maximum amount of work. So if you remember, in your first year on a job, you're like, oh, who do I trust? Where do I get my lunch? How does this process work? It takes a lot of energy that first 6 months to a year. You're like, I don't know everybody. I don't know how to get my job done. By the end of the first year, like, okay, I'm humming along, I'm in my zone. Third year, you're taking on all this extra stuff. And that might be in the second year now, just because the
Yeah.
way work is picked up. But our comfort zones are good. Routines are comfort zones, habits are comfort zones. They save us time if they're good habits and good routines. Now, this goes back to our conversation earlier that, you know, for innovation to happen, we have to step out of our comfort zone. And that does take energy, and it does take mental, physical, emotional energy to do that. So we do need to get out of it. And we also want a bunch of stuff that's in our comfort zone. Because when too much steps out all at once of our comfort zone, it can become very overwhelming.
Mm. It's really good to talk about that because we have this whole notion of if you're in your comfort zone, you kind of just drifting along and it's
You're
all
a
like,
loser.
yeah,
You're
you're not
like, you don't
stretched
know what you're
enough.
doing.
And actually it's the whole like where do we get to in terms of someone's acing their job? They're like they're so good at it. They are using all their strengths. They love what they do, so they are giving 110%. And it's that no, you're too comfortable with it. We're going to make you do something else. And you just think, oh my gosh, that person was just so well suited. And so I guess like what you're saying, you can it's okay to be outside, mainly in your comfort zone, but you can keep stretching someone by giving them extra responsibility or helping them think about something a bit different to add on. But keep people where they're really good and where they're
Yeah.
really happy and where they can excel.
Yeah. And some of us I think are naturally inclined. I know I am to do new. I love new things. So I get bored quickly.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I've been very fortunate to have roles that are new, that require newness and change. Some people are not suited to that. So they're much better, going to a job 9 to 5, and thank God for that because I'm not that person.
Mm,
Um, and we need people like that.
yeah,
And I think it is stepping out of comfort zone can look different for different people,
exactly.
and what that looks like can look different for different people. I
Yeah.
think the trick is though is you don't want to do too much comfort zone jumping at once.
Mm,
And at work, there is a lot of change going on. So we really want to make sure we have bigger change capabilities or change muscles because the more strength you have, the more you can lift. And it's
mm.
the same principle with the skills and abilities we use at work.
And I do think there's that sense of it's almost like I'm picturing almost like a kind of like an onion, like it was different
Yeah.
layers where your comfort zone's in the middle, and then you've got stuff that's just outside it, which you think, oh, maybe I could kind of look at developing that. And then you've
Mhm.
got the stuff that's right on the outside that you just don't want to go anywhere near because it just the impact of being that far out of a comfort zone is so negative. I was
Yeah.
talking to a leader a couple of weeks ago who, in his job as a leader, is expected to go along and do his networking at these different events and stuff. It it triggers in him such a massive level of anxiety that sticks with him for weeks afterwards.
Oh yeah.
And we were having this conversation. It's just not worth it. Like just because that is notionally part of your role as a leader, like who made that rule up? It's not something you feel confident doing. You're not good at it. You don't like the impact it has on you in that moment or for the time afterwards. The people around you you're supposed to be leading are going to be impacted by that. Who made that rule up? Why not let someone over here who loves networking and is
Yeah.
really awesome at it do that stuff? So it's kind of acknowledging, and I guess that comes back to leaders knowing the members of their team really well. So I know what someone likes to do and what they feel comfortable doing and what they're really good at. And I know the stuff that's way off over here that we just shouldn't be putting people in that position.
I love that. And I think, one of the things I've often said to leaders, and that which has been true for me when I've had a choice and not just inherited a team, I really like to hire people who are good at things that I'm not. And
Yeah.
I really like to hire people that are not like me, even though I really want to hire people like me because it's easier to work with. And, the research shows we tend to hire our clones
Mhm.
because, hey, if I'm good, everybody else is going to
Yeah.
be good. But we know that diversity of thinking and diversity of thought creates a stronger team.
Mm.
And I, you know, I recommend leaders now. We often talk about, mentoring in the context of leadership. I encourage leaders who are of a certain age to find a young mentor. I want people. I have one, two, three young mentors in my life who are different backgrounds than me, who know how to do a bunch of stuff. I have no idea what they're doing. Um, and they range from about 20 to 40, I would say, with various ranges of skill sets that I call upon, and they are my mentors.
Mm.
And I'm sure I help them in some way. I'm not sure what. Oh yeah, I did tell one of them, you need to put your contact information on your pamphlet that you're emailing out. So I guess I did help one of them. But they have a skill sets in areas that I don't.
Mm.
And I think it's important that we, as in leadership roles, look for people that are younger than us and try to, if we can, if your role's head of philanthropy or something for an organization and involves networking, you're going to have to like to network.
Yeah.
But there's 10, even in my company, and I'm sure with yours, there's 10% of my job I just don't like, and I don't
Okay.
like to do, and I still have to do it because nobody else can do it. Like, I'm very lucky to outsource and have a good team that supports all the crap I don't know how to do or
Hmm.
want to do. Ranging from bookkeeping and finance or to social media and, all the glamorous stuff of running a business. I say glamorous sarcastically. Uh, but there's still 10% of my stuff I don't like to do.
Yeah.
But it's 10%.
Yeah.
And that's going to be true for everyone. Yet what you're saying is that leader that has, big chunk, get rid of it. Otherwise, you're not going to stay in your job.
And I think there's a difference between not liking something and actually having a really negative impact on.
Great pointing a visceral
Yeah,
response.
yeah,
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
So another statement, how is leadership measured? So there
Mm.
be because I think it's a really interesting one because there'll be some leaders who are just trying to do the best thing they can because they want to be the best leader they can. And they're kind of soaking up any nuggets of wisdom about what that might look like.
Oh,
The
yeah.
other leaders who are like, I'm fine as I am. Like, why do I need to change? So
Don't you love working with those?
oh man. So how do we measure leadership in terms of well, in terms of whether they're doing well or not?
Well, there's 360s. Yay, I love a 360. Well, I don't, but whatever. 360s are fine. I prefer regular conversations with my team members so there's no surprises on a 360, right? Like,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
I'm a real jerk, let's figure that out before we do a
Mhm.
360, right? I do think 360s are valuable in some capacity. Outside of a more formal leadership piece, which I think I would say, and my friends who do assessments would kill me for this. I think a lot of people are assessmented out,
Mm.
surveyed out.
Hmm.
I think what is often a greater impact combined with an assessment, like I'm fine if you want to do a 360 on people, blah, 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 but not just make it a critical, you're a loser because you do this, or, I hate my boss because he doesn't know how to run a meeting. Well, send them, whatever, figure that out.
Mm.
And those are, I'm not diminishing that. That's all important stuff. But I think since we're talking about leadership today, not just management functions,
Hmm.
you know, I think leaders think they're measured all the time by their team. And I don't believe that, and the research doesn't show it. And I've seen various metaphors for it. I've seen 2% moments. I say 7% just because I like the number seven.
Mm.
And I believe that I'm going to maybe increase it to 10% because I'm believing we're having more of these moments. And so these 10%, I'm going to say, I usually say 7% moments, so I'm actually increasing it to 10. These 10% moments are those moments that that you as a leader were in a meeting and you went back to your desk and went, darn, I should have handled that differently. And I got to go back out and correct that. They're the moments where, the crap was hitting the fan and you said to your team, I don't know what the heck I'm doing, but I'm in this with you. They're those 10% moments. They're moments that matter. So it's when the crap hits the fan that you're measured. You really are. No one's measuring you on a day-to-day basis. You are measured if you let every meeting go over. They'll think you're a bad leader. You're measured if you don't deal with performance issues. That's a moment that matters. Um, one of your staff members shows up with cancer. How one of the organizations I'm working with now, one of their team members who makes very little money, it's in a men's support role, and they're in their late 60s. Um, showed up with cancer, and the CEO of this organization said, "We're just continuing their pay."
Mm.
And I'll tell you, that was a moment that mattered.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll tell you, the staff were like, because not all the staff were involved in this conversation, but the senior executive team were like, do you, that is a trust building moment. That is a moment that matters.
Yeah.
And it's those moments that you're measured in. And I think that if, and we're not perfect.
Mm.
And I think if we have insight to ourselves and some of our issues, like my issues, yeah, I have perennial issues that are always going to pop up that I have to manage. So I often think before I speak, or I often talk before I think. Yeah, and I need to think before I speak. See, and that's a because I'm an extroverted thinker, external processor. It's always my issue,
Mm.
and I know how to manage that, and I know when I do that or interrupt someone because I'm so excited. I'm not interrupting them because I just want to be me, and I'm just like, I stop, I can pull it back, and that's a moment that matters, and it's and it's a perennial thing that comes up for me because it's, you know, we all have personality traits that are never going to change. We need to build the skills to manage them,
Yeah.
and it's not good or bad. It's just who we are. So I
Exactly
think,
that. I think that's a really important point. It's just who we are, and that self-awareness, but importantly, knowing the impact it has on other people and how to manage that that's key, isn't it?
oh my gosh, I did a whole section in my book called "Get a PhD in Yourself."
Mm. Yeah.
Start there.
Yeah.
Don't worry about your blah blah. I'm lucky. I like to know how humans function, so I studied that, and it's been my whole life since I was 10. Uh, but yeah, get a PhD in yourself. Know what ticks you off, what upsets you, because you're going to need to know that when you go into meetings and how you're going to handle it.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you put on a brave face, but you know that you have to take a breath so that you don't want to reach out. And I have what I call an inner demon that goes
Mhm.
that
And,
comes out and just want to rip that person's head off sitting across from me.
and you know what? Being able to, when you're self-aware and you know what sets you off, being able to share that with other people. I had a really great conversation yesterday with someone I work with. We are very different in terms of how we approach our work. They're a bit like you, an external thinker, and we'll be in a meeting with a client and out the stuff all comes. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we just need to suck that back in because and 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 it's but actually it's just we have very different ways of working. And I think being able to be open about that and go, this is how my brain works. And for that, my colleague to say, this is how my brain works, and we can both say, okay, we're aware of that. How do we, what are we doing individually to make sure we are managing that ourselves, but what are we also doing to support each other? So getting permission from each other. So if I was to start doing something that actually potentially could be unhelpful for the situation, but it's just my response, what
Mm-hmm.
am I giving permission to my colleagues to do or say, just as a gentle prompt, a little reminder for me to go, hey Lisa, actually you're doing that thing again. And but I've given permission because I've shared what goes on for me, what I'm aware of. I'm working really, really hard to try not to do that. And actually, if I miss it, if I forget it, or I'm just not noticing, please can you remind me? It's so powerful for a team.
It is. And I think, and saying that too, I don't think it absconds us of the responsibility to dial up and dial down.
No.
So just because I'm a raging extroverted thinker doesn't mean that I can do that all the time. It
Mm,
means, for example, when you're talking, I have to breathe, listen, not interrupt,
yeah,
create the space because I have to create space for people to talk. And that
exactly.
and I can't just, a lot of people, and that's what I said about, those assessment tools earlier, are sometimes problematic. I'm a D, I'm an I, I'm a red, and an MBTI, la, 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 whatever you are. It's great you know that. It's
Hmm.
not an excuse for bad behavior. We still have to dial up and dial down because any good behavior taken to the extreme is not good.
Yeah, good
So
point.
there's that flexing of knowing what to do and when to do it.
I want to ask you quickly. Now, I normally try and keep my podcast just under an hour, but I'm
Okay.
going to make an exception there because I want to ask you this question because psychological safety is something we talk a lot about in
Mm.
workplaces. So here's the last statement. Psychological safety is not a business term and it's difficult to understand.
Yeah. You know, as someone with a background in psychology and the social sciences, I like the term and I understand that. In the workplace, it feels really touchy-feely to me and I really hate it. It
Mm,
just feels all squishy and gross. And I'm like, I don't know what that means, you know, if I didn't have my background.
mm,
And I really like to think of it as and the research, you know, there's a wonderful woman named Sunny Giles who was out of Harvard and did a meta-analysis of 30 years of research that Harvard had done. So meta, like look at all the research, and she came up with the number one skill required of leaders was to create psychological safety. I'm like, bleh. So I looked underneath that. I'm like, what does this mean? And she wrote, it's about the ability to create engagement, commitment, and trust. And so those are the terms I use because when you create engagement, commitment, and trust, because psychological safety is really about are we able to have honest conversations? Are
yeah.
we engaged? Is there commitment to our work? How do we build trust? You know, Charles Feltman did some wonderful research for those that are interested in trust. He wrote a book called The Thin Book of Trust. And he looked at, because trust is such a big topic, and he breaks it down into 4 areas and really simple things and makes it easy to understand. So one is sincerity. Do you mean what you say? So I can trust you or not trust you on that. Um, Caring. Do you actually care about what I have to say? It doesn't mean you have to agree, but do you actually care? I can trust that or not. Competence is the other one. Do you have the skill to do what you say you can do? Because you can trust people on 2 of those and not that. And the last one is hold on, competence, caring, and reliability. Do you do what you do when you say you're going to do it?
Yeah.
So he looks at these layers and figures out, and so you can trust people on 3 of them, but not one, and then tells you ways to build them. And that is a great tactical leadership way to build trust in the workplace, which leads to psychological safety and all the other stuff you and I do, of course, creates
Mm,
engagement and commitment.
mhm.
Hopefully.
But the simplifying is so important because, and as you say, I mean, the term for me, psychological safety, is just it's a bit kind of like grandiose. It's like what are we trying to say by that? It's let's just say it how it is. And when you're talking about being able to just have really honest conversations where someone's really listening and they really
Yeah.
care about it, and then people go, "Oh, is that it?" And you're like, "Yeah, actually, is that simple?" Executing it is not as simple because
No.
people are distracted by everything else going on, all these notifications distracting my attention and my just there's a whole host of things that get in the way of us actually doing it well. But in terms of what it actually isn't rocket science.
No. And I think the thing is, the challenge I have with psychological safety too is it paints this picture that we all need to be safe. Well, safety has many different layers that work. So sometimes it's not safe for me to bring up a certain topic to my boss, even though I'm engaged, even though I can trust him completely or her, and even though I'm committed. It just doesn't feel appropriate. It doesn't feel safe given what's going on. And I don't like people to get that because that's a very fair statement
Hmm.
to make, and that
Hmm.
a lot of people feel at various times. Sometimes it's not safe, sometimes it's not appropriate, whatever language you use. And that's different than psychological safety, you know, in terms of engagement, commitment, and trust, because you're not always going to feel, you know, yeah,
Yeah, life isn't that rosy, is it?
life isn't that, and it's not that simple. It's
No.
complex, and
Mm,
workplace relationships are complex.
mm.
And as leaders, we want to do our best to just create that environment for people to succeed because we can't make people succeed, but we can create the environment for them to succeed.
Well said. So for leaders listening to this, what would be your key messages? What should be the key takeaways from this episode of the podcast?
I think a big piece would be get a good PhD in yourself. Get real clear on that. You're not going to be perfect. That's okay. Acknowledge it takes a lot more strength to acknowledge that you don't know the answers and that you don't have it all figured out and that you're in the muck with everyone else. And that your goal as a leader is to build the bridge with people. Because when you do that, they will stay with you. Whether they like you or not, likability is a factor, but it's not the only thing.
Yeah.
You don't need to like everyone.
I have loved listening to what you said, and for those who are listening very well at the start of this conversation will note that when I introduced you, I said you're an author. Tell us briefly about your book.
Well, my book back here, Spark Action: How to Create Change That Matters. I wrote it just after COVID because I realized we would start to need some tools and tips to stop selling and convincing people, but to engage them in our ideas. And really, how do we create a future-ready culture? And that's what the book's all about.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes. And we'll put all the links to you on LinkedIn and your website and everything else. It'll all go in the show notes so people can reach out to you, they can follow you, they can get access to you. I guess you have mailing lists or something so they can get on your...
so we have a newsletter. They can go to bechangeready.com, sign up for that. We get resources. It's got videos. There's tons of free articles and research and podcasts, everything on my website. It's all free for your taking. Fabulous. So use it and share it.
Great. Gregg, thank you so much for joining me today. I have loved this conversation. It's exactly what I wanted and I anticipate in terms of the energy, just the frankness of the conversation, which is much needed in this day and age. So thank you so very much.
Thank you so much for having me. I've loved it as well. I love having statements and having dialogue. So great work on that one, Lisa.
Thank you.
What have you taken from that conversation to think about or do differently? How has that inspired you to develop practice to bring out the best in people, including yourself? This podcast gets more listeners when people like you give a thumbs up on Apple or wherever you listen, and especially if you leave a short review. So please help be part of the movement towards creating workplaces that really provide the best experience for their people. And do reach out to me directly to discuss your challenges at work and ideas for development. If we're not already acquainted on LinkedIn, let's connect. All the links you need are in the show notes. And if you join the club, you'll be the first to hear about relevant updates and free downloadable resources that are part of developing practice and performance. Thanks for joining me today.